Where is she? Kwon Jae-min's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a blade. Director Beck stood 3 feet away, hands clasped, jaw tight, and said nothing. Because there was nothing to say, Jae-min walked past him slowly into the penthouse that no longer felt like his. The wardrobe was open, empty hangers swinging in the air conditioning like something recently abandoned. Grace's vanity, bottom mortal. Her shoes gone. The art they'd chosen together in Paris gone. The safe behind the wall panel, open, cleaned out, not a single document remaining. He walked to the center of the living room and stopped. On the floor, one red envelope with his name written in her handwriting. He stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. Inside, a single sentence written in flawless Korean. Everything you built on my back, I took back with my name. He read it twice. Then he sat down on the cold marble floor of his own empty penthouse, still wearing the shirt from the night before, and stared at nothing. Before we go any further, if you're new here, subscribe right now and turn on notifications because this channel delivers stories that will stop you mid-scroll every single time. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what you think Grace should have done. Now let's get into it. 6 years earlier, Kwon Jae-min was not a man who believed in accidents. Every move he made was calculated. Every alliance, every acquisition, every silence at the right moment in the right room. He had built one of the most quietly powerful criminal organizations in Seoul through discipline, patience, and the kind of cold intelligence that made his enemies uncomfortable before they even knew why. He did not fall in love by accident either. But Grace had been the one exception to every rule he had ever made for himself. She was in Seoul on a research fellowship with an international financial crimes unit. Sharp, composed, carrying herself with the particular calm of someone who had nothing to prove and no interest in pretending otherwise. They met at a charity event neither of them wanted to attend. He had approached her because she was the only person in the room not looking at him. She had responded because he spoke to her like she was the most interesting person there. Not the most beautiful, not the most exotic, the most interesting. It was the first time in a long time that Grace had felt genuinely seen, and she never fully recovered from that feeling. She knew what he was. She was not naive. She was, in fact, perhaps the only person in Jaemin's life who understood the full architecture of his world. Not because he told her, but because she was professionally trained to follow the money. She chose him anyway. She chose him because underneath the empire, underneath the cold authority and the rooms that went quiet when he entered, there was a man who laughed differently when it was just the two of them. A man who asked her questions and actually listened. A man she believed, fully, dangerously, could be loved into something whole. They married in a private ceremony. No announcement, no photographs in circulation, no public record beyond the legal documents. Jae-min had structured their life with the same precision he applied to everything else. Because Grace was a Black American woman with no traceable connection to Seoul's underworld. Every major asset in his portfolio, 3 properties across Seoul, Jeju, and Singapore, for shell companies holding commercial real estate, 2 investment accounts, was legally registered in her name. It was armor. Clean, untouchable, untraceable armor. He had handed her the keys to everything he owned because he was certain she would never know what she was holding, or if she did, that she would never use it. He was wrong on both counts. The warning signs had been building for weeks before the night everything broke. Grace had noticed them the way she noticed everything, quietly, carefully, without reaction. Jaemin's calls got shorter. His arrivals got later. There was a new quality to his voice when she asked simple questions. Not irritation exactly, but distance. Like she was a conversation he was already stepping back from. She told herself she was imagining it. She told herself she was overthinking. But Grace had spent her entire career learning to read patterns in data, and the pattern in front of her was becoming impossible to ignore. 3 nights before the morning Jae-min came home to an empty house, Grace made a decision. She was going to stop waiting for him to come back to her. She cooked dinner, his favorites, the ones that took real time and attention. She lit candles. She wore the dress he had once told her made her look like something he did not deserve. She set the table, and she waited. 8 o'clock came, then 9. She called once. It rang out. By 11, the candles had burned low and his chair was still empty. She blew them out herself, packed the food into containers, and sat at the kitchen island with her laptop open. She was not crying. She was thinking, and then she started working. The first thing she pulled up was a hotel charge from 2 weeks prior under a secondary card she had signing authority over. A hotel in Gangnam she had never visited. A charge for a suite. She cross-referenced it against Jae-min's calendar. He had told her that night he was in a meeting with suppliers in Incheon. She sat with that for a moment. Then she kept going. By the time dawn came through the windows of that kitchen, Grace had a complete picture. She knew about the hotel. She knew about Seo Yun, the youngest daughter of the Seo crime family, whose father Jae-min had been quietly negotiating with for the better part of a year. She knew that the property in Gangnam she had signed for 3 months ago had been used to facilitate that relationship in ways that had nothing to do with business. She knew that Jae-min had not made a mistake born of weakness or a moment of loneliness. He had made a choice, a deliberate, political, strategic choice. And in making it, he had confirmed something Grace had been quietly afraid of for longer than she wanted to admit. She was not his partner. She was not even his priority. She was a legal instrument in a world where real women did not get to take up too much space. Grace closed her laptop. She sat in the silence for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called the one person she trusted completely. "Auntie Lorraine," she said when the call connected. "I need 20 minutes. Aunt Lorraine did not panic, which was exactly why Grace had called her. She listened for the full 20 minutes without interrupting, through the hotel charge, through the Gangnam property, through the dinner that had gone cold on a table no one came home to. When Grace finished, the line was quiet for a moment. "Baby," Aunt Lorraine said, "what do you need from me?" "Nothing," Grace said. "I just needed someone to know where I am before I'm not here anymore." Another pause. "You're sure about this?" "I've been sure for 3 weeks," Grace said. "I just needed him to confirm it for me." She hung up, set her phone face down on the counter, and went to her home office. She sat at her desk, opened a clean browser window, and contacted a private legal firm in Singapore she had researched quietly over the prior month. She had not contacted them because she was planning to leave. She had contacted them because she was intelligent enough to know that when powerful men felt cornered, they did not fight fairly, and she had wanted to understand her options before she ever needed them. Now she needed them. Over the next 72 hours, while Jae-min was unreachable, Grace worked with the focus of a woman who had made peace with her decision before she made it. The first property, the penthouse in Seoul, she listed through a legitimate agency using her legal authority as sole registered owner. The agency moved fast because the price was right. The second property, a commercial unit in Jeju, sold within 48 hours to a buyer the Singapore firm had quietly connected her with. She closed the shell company accounts through the proper legal channels, each one clean, each one documented, each one impossible to dispute. She transferred the proceeds through a sequence of holding accounts she had restructured weeks prior. She packed one suitcase. She left the rest. She wiped her laptop. She set the red envelope on the floor of the living room in a position where it could not be missed, and she walked out of the penthouse door without looking back. She did not run. She did not rush. She took a commercial flight under her real name to Bangkok, stayed 2 nights, then moved to Cape Town on a connection through Nairobi. She paid cash at the first accommodation. She used her real name at the second. She made one traceable purchase at a market near the waterfront, not out of carelessness, but because she had left a trail on purpose. She wanted Jae-min to follow it. She had things to say that could only be said face to face. Back in Seoul, the damage was becoming real. Jae-min had called Director Beck within an hour of arriving home to the empty penthouse. Beck had assembled the legal team and the financial advisors before noon. By evening, the picture was fully painted. The penthouse sold legal. The Jeju property sold legal. 3 shell company accounts closed and emptied legal. Every single transaction had been executed with correct authority by the sole registered owner of each asset. There was nothing to dispute, nothing to reverse, nothing to attack without exposing the legal foundations of what those assets had been used to protect. One of the lawyers, a careful man who chose his words like a surgeon chose incisions, cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Kwon, respectfully, she did not steal from you. Under Korean civil law, she simply exercised ownership." The room was very quiet. Beck watched Jae-min absorb this. He had worked for this man for 9 years. He had seen him face rivals, betrayal, police pressure, internal power struggles. He had never seen Jae-min look like this. Not angry, not calculating. Something quieter and somehow more dangerous, like a man confronting the gap between who he believed himself to be and who he had actually become. "Find her," was all Jae-min said. The search took 2 weeks, and burned favors Jae-min had spent years accumulating. Grace had moved carefully enough that the first week produced almost nothing. Bangkok, a hotel receipt, a name, then silence. His people traced her south, Cape Town emerging as the most likely destination based on the Nairobi connection. But she had covered her movement well enough that confidence was low. Until the anomalies. Beck brought them to Jae-min personally. A hotel booking in Cape Town's waterfront district, real name, not a pseudonym. A fresh produce purchase at an open market with a card linked to an account Grace had never used before their marriage. 2 points of visible, traceable presence from a woman who had spent the prior 2 weeks being invisible. Beck laid the documents on the table and watched Jae-min study them. "She wants you to find her," Beck said carefully. Jae-min looked up. "She left a trail," Beck continued. "This woman closed 4 accounts, sold 2 properties, and crossed 3 countries without a single traceable error. And then she puts her real name on a hotel register." He paused. "She is not hiding, sir. She is waiting." Jae-min said nothing for a long time. He looked at the documents. He thought about Grace sitting at that kitchen island in the dark, laptop open, making decisions he had forced her to make. He thought about the red envelope, the single sentence, the 6 years of a marriage he had treated like a legal instrument. He thought about the dinner she had cooked that had gone uneaten. He stood up. "Book me a flight," he said. "1 ticket. I'm going alone." Beck opened his mouth to argue. Jae-min looked at him, and Beck closed it again. He landed in Cape Town on a gray morning, the ocean air hitting him as he stepped out of the terminal. Unfamiliar, wide open, carrying none of the weight of Seoul. He had the address. He took a car alone. The house was a modest rental on a hill with a clear view of the Atlantic. The kind of place chosen not for luxury, but for perspective. He walked up the path, and when he turned the corner to the terrace, he stopped. Grace was sitting in a chair with a glass of juice in her hand, face tilted slightly toward the water, completely unbothered. She was not running. She was not braced. She looked like a woman who had finally put down something very heavy and was quietly enjoying the feeling of empty hands. She heard him coming. She turned and looked at him with an expression that held no surprise. Just recognition. Just patience. She waited for him to reach her. Jae-min stopped a few feet from her. He had rehearsed this moment on the flight. Every version of what he would say, how he would take control of the conversation, how he would make her understand the scale of what she had done. But standing in front of her now, with the ocean behind her and that look on her face, calm, clear, completely unmoved, every prepared word dissolved. So he said the first honest thing that came out. "You took everything." Grace looked at him. "I took what was mine," she said simply. "There's a difference. That is not what we agreed." "What did we agree, Jae-min?" Her voice was even. Not cold. Not theatrical. Even. "Because I signed those documents believing I was your wife. Not your liability shield. Not your legal strategy. Your wife." She paused. "Did you ever tell me which one I actually was?" He didn't answer. She nodded slowly, like his silence was a sentence she had already read. "Sit down," she said. "Or stand. Either way, I'm going to finish this conversation." He sat. "I knew about CO Yun," Grace said. "I want you to know that. I wasn't guessing and I wasn't assuming. I followed the trail the same way I was trained to, because you left one, and I think some part of you expected me to find it and say nothing." She tilted her head slightly. "Was I right?" Jae-min looked at the table. "It wasn't what you think." "I know exactly what it was," Grace said. "She's CO Dae-young's daughter. You've been negotiating a territorial alignment with her father for 8 months. Spending that night with her was a social contract in your world, a gesture of good faith, a signal of alliance. It had nothing to do with love or loneliness. She paused, which is almost worse. He looked up at her. Because it means, Grace continued, that you made a choice that would devastate your wife, and you made it the same way you'd authorize a property transfer. Efficiently, without losing sleep. Grace, I cooked dinner that night, she said. Did you know that? I spent 3 hours in that kitchen because I've been feeling you pull away for weeks, and I thought, if I could just get you back in that space with me, I could reach you. Her jaw tightened slightly, the first crack in her composure. I sat at that table until 11 o'clock, Jae-min. I called once, and then I blew the candles out myself. The silence between them was enormous. I'm not telling you that to hurt you, Grace said. I'm telling you because you should know what was on the other side of the choice you made. A woman who still believed in you, sitting in the dark, waiting. Jae-min's throat moved. I didn't know. You didn't ask, she said. That was the whole problem. In 6 years of marriage, you stopped asking. You stopped seeing me as someone whose answer mattered. I became part of the infrastructure, Jae-min, useful, reliable, registered in all the right places. She looked at him steadily. Do you know when I realized that? Not the night you didn't come home. Long before that. When I started noticing that the only time you introduced me to anyone in your world was when there was a document that needed my signature. He had nothing to say to that. Because it was true, and they both knew it. I loved you, Grace said. I want to be clear about that. I loved you with full information. I knew who you were, what you ran, what your world cost people. I loved you anyway because I believed you were more than your empire. I still believe that. She paused. But I am not willing to be a casualty of it. What do you want from me? Jae-min asked. His voice had lost every edge. He just sounded tired. Tell me what you want. I already have what I want, Grace said. I have my freedom. I have the resources to build a life that belongs entirely to me. I have a passport and an ocean view, and for the first time in years, I wake up in the morning without a knot in my chest. She looked at him almost gently. What I came here for, what I left that trail for, was one honest conversation. That's all. I needed you to sit across from me and hear what your choices actually cost. And now, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Now I want you to answer the question I should have asked you years ago. She held his gaze. Was I ever your wife? Or was I always just your best legal strategy? Jae-min looked at her for a long time. The ocean moved behind her. The wind came through the terrace. He thought about the night they met and how she had been the only person in that room who hadn't looked at him like he was dangerous. He thought about how he had felt in the early years, lighter somehow, in the specific presence of this woman. When had he let that become something he stopped protecting? When had he decided that because she was steady, she did not need to be considered? You were never just a strategy, he said quietly. I know that doesn't fix anything. No, Grace agreed. It doesn't. She stood up. She picked up her passport from the side table. Unhurried, deliberate, like a woman who had made every decision she needed to make and had no interest in revisiting them. I'm leaving again tomorrow, she said. I don't know where yet. That's the point. Jae-min stood too. He reached toward her, not grabbing, just reaching, and she looked at his hand for a long moment. Not with anger, with something more honest than anger. Something that looked like the last of a grief she was finally setting down. She didn't take his hand. She pulled her passport to her chest and stepped back. If you rebuild, she said, and I mean actually rebuild, not the empire, I mean yourself, you know how to find me. She looked at him one more time. Goodbye, Jae-min. She walked through the terrace door and closed it behind her. He stood alone on that hillside with a red envelope still folded in his inside pocket. The one he had been carrying since the moment he picked it off the floor of his empty penthouse. He pulled it out and looked at it. Then he looked at the ocean. Some men build empires and believe that makes them powerful. Kwon Jae-min had built one of the most feared organizations in Seoul, and he had lost the one person who had ever made him feel like a man worth choosing, not a man worth fearing. Grace had not destroyed him. She had simply shown him the cost of taking something precious and treating it like a tool. And she had walked away glowing. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop in the comments, Team Grace all the way, or do you think Jae-min deserves a second chance? Subscribe if you're not subscribed yet. because we tell stories here that stay with you. We will see you in the next one.